Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? How am I doing is really the question. How are you doing is what I usually ask every other day of the year. But on this night, unlike all other nights, which isn't a night, it's a morning. That's one reason. It's so different from other nights. It's Friday, August 25th, 2023. Time not only for another show, but time for the big birthday bonanza, I guess. I'm putting it on for myself, so I suppose it's not a surprise. But it's my birthday. Doing a show anyway, or I guess ordinarily I might decide to take the day off. But, one, I guess we owe it to Armando, whose birthday it also is, to recognize that. Plus, all the other birthdays that for some reason center and cluster around this August 25th axis I've mentioned before to you. I mentioned yesterday, not only Scott's birthday tomorrow, but that 2 days ago, the 23rd, which we didn't recognize on the day, is Darwin's birthday as well. This show can't get any more Virgo. I don't think that it's possible. If you're into astrology, you can tell me whether that makes any sort of sense or not. But I think so. I think the nature of this show is just extraordinarily Virgo in a way. Anyway, but there's lots to catch up on, of course, and a lot of things that we really owe you and want to bring to your attention. Of course, today is the deadline for everybody to surrender in the Fulton County case. And the biggest names, I think, have taken care of everything already. And I don't know whether they resolved what was going on with Jeffery Clark or not. He was the one with the, I guess, the most cogent argument, if not a particularly good one or effective one, against making the trip to Georgia for the booking. And I think Meadows took care of his booking. I think his mugshot is already in circulation. But yesterday, the big event was the Trump surrender. And to give you some measure of how big a news event that was, my email inbox is jammed full of promotions from The Hill and other newspapers, selling essentially minute-by-minute description of what's going on here. If you scroll back enough, let's see. There's, is this the earliest one? I'm just sort of, all right. Here's from The Hill. This is yesterday morning, I think. Breaking news: former Trump chief of staff Mark Meadows surrenders at Fulton County Jail. So now we got confirmation that he made his appearance and surrendered. There's also a couple, every couple minutes, really, they were emailing about something else. There's a Hill news alert, what to expect at Trump's surrender in Georgia. Then news alert, Trump departs New Jersey for Atlanta to surrender at Fulton County Jail. It really was overboard, don't you think? And then, let's see. Then a little thing about Prigozhin as well. Then Trump lands in Atlanta to surrender for historic fourth arrest, by the way. It's nice of them to point out. Here's the New York Times chiming in. Follow live. Trump prepares to surrender at Georgia jail. Then The Hill again. Breaking news. Trump surrenders to authorities at Georgia. Vanity Fair comes in with Trump surrenders in Georgia. The Hill, read Trump jail record in Georgia election case. I don't know. Is there something to read about that? Then Trump mugshot makes history after surrender at Fulton County Jail. The Hill again. Then New York Times again. Breaking news. Trump booked at Atlanta jail. Mugshot is released. Something, blah, blah, blah. The Hill then reporting. Breaking news. Trump returns to Twitter under its new moniker, X. Thank you for pointing that out. And then The Hill's morning report this morning. A serious mugshot for Trump. That is probably the wrong word for it. I think they were talking about the face he put on, but we'll talk about that in a second because I'm not done yet. There's still more. Hill, news alert, Trump recounts, quote, terrible experience of being booked in Georgia. And is there any more? No. I think that's finally the end of the flood. and they're back to something else completely different at this point. So good. The flash in the pan is over. The serious face thing, there was some side betting, I think, online going on about what sort of expression Trump would be wearing, really, during his mugshot. Would he go with the silly, stupid grin, like I don't take any of this seriously, or would he go with would he be in fact angry and show that in his face, or would he be doing his serious, tough guy scowl look? So I saw some people speculating about which one might be which. There are good arguments for all of them, but in the end, he went with the blue steel thing. And I did see speculation online, somebody saying, I guess Keith Olbermann must have offered this speculation that he went not only with the scowl, but with the downward pointed head. And I'm surprised they let him do that. They probably should have said, pick your head up and stand normally. But I guess they didn't want to push him around too much. They got the picture they needed. But I guess it was Keith Olbermann's speculation that the head down thing was to hide the double chin, which is possible. But I don't know how much effort you really should put into looking your best in your mugshot. But anyway, that's what he did. Fulton County, as we know already from the other mugshots, doesn't use the height indicators in the background, so I got deprived of that. I haven't seen much about the weight thing, although I did see people talking about the weight thing, and so maybe they did in fact take Trump's weight as well. I don't know. Let me see if I can find something about that in the news. All right, yeah. Washington Post says, "Oh, what a joke!" So apparently they don't really care about keeping accurate records of anything in Fulton County. I don't know. So they listed they did him the favor of listing him at 6'3". So I guess they don't have you take your shoes off. It might be, okay. Justice says one of his staffers filled it in. Is that right? They don't actually measure you. That's interesting. Well, at least the height thing, you'd think that they would want something correct. But, as long as they get it in the neighborhood, I guess they're fine. And if you constantly wear lifts in your shoes, I guess the idea is to describe you as you might appear on the street if you were a fugitive. But get this, they list his weight at 215, and there's no chance in hell that he is 215 pounds. That's ridiculous. The 237 or 239 that Ronnie Jackson attested to was a joke. I think most people probably figure that he's closer to 300 pounds. The idea of being any different, of his being 215 pounds is rather ridiculous. Now, let's see. There's a whole article here about it. I mean, I didn't realize it was going to be such a big deal, but here's the Washington Post on it. What we learned about Trump's height and weight in the Georgia booking, we learned that he's lying. The president's height was listed at 6'3", which is not true, and his weight at 215, which is not even in the realm of truth. Not on this planet. He's giving us his weight on the moon, possibly. But anyway, based on some of his co-defendants, the numbers may not be accurate. Can you believe it? That's the subheader by Amy Gardner's piece in the Washington Post. Look, he got booked at the jail, skipped down to the good stuff. They listed it as 6'3", 215, nearly 30 pounds lighter than his disclosed weight at the time of his last official White House physical. I don't think so. But based on the booking records for his co-defendants that have already emerged this week, the numbers may not be reliable. Why didn't his co-defendants think ahead on this and put down weights that would make relative sense to his 215? People should have been saying they were 111 pounds in order to make sense of things. Because here it is. Okay, there's the indictment. I don't need to explain the indictment, why the people were listed in it, etc. Let's see. Here's the other stats that they got. While the booking records of the other co-defendants list each person's height, weight, race, and hair and eye color, it's clear that many of the stats were wrong. What's not clear is where officials with the Fulton County Sheriff's Office got them. David Schaefer, for instance, former state GOP chairman, charged in connection with his role organizing the meeting of alternative or fake fraudulent electors, listed his booking record as 5'5" and 150 pounds with black hair and blue eyes. Is that unreasonable. I don't know David Schaefer, but it does say public appearances show Schaefer to be taller and more heavy set than that, with gray hair and brown eyes. So they should get your eye color right. Another alternate elector charged in the case, Kathy Latham, is listed with blonde or strawberry blonde hair. Her hair is, in fact, gray. Trump's hair color was described as blonde or strawberry, and his eye color was listed as blue. And we all know that his true hair color is piss floss, and no one knows why they allowed him to get away with a strawberry. All right. In the case of former Trump personal attorney Rudy Giuliani, who surrendered Wednesday, jail records initially listed him as 5'9" and 180 pounds. I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. 180. I mean, he's not gigantic, but I don't know if he's 5'9", 180. Anyway, later the same day, the numbers had changed without explanation to 5'11". Also, maybe, I don't know about Giuliani, and 230 pounds, which, is probably closer to what his weight may be if he's 5'11". I don't know. But at any rate, an individual who accompanied Giuliani to his booking, who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the sensitive subject, said they did not recall anyone asking former New York mayor for his height and weight, nor do they recall him being asked to step on a scale. So I don't even know why they list it if they don't measure you. Is there others? I mean, I don't know. The only thing I have to go on is Giuliani. Now, they do mention down here that in 2016, Trump said he was 6'3", 236, which the medical community considers overweight. But if he had been 6'2", as listed on his New York driver's license, he would be considered obese. At the time, Trump acknowledged that he needed to lose 15 to 20 pounds. So yada, yada, yada. All right. Anyway, so nobody knows how much he weighs, and this is only going to bolster his case. I guess I would say the only other thing that really related to the booking that is worth mentioning that I can think of, although I was interested in one of the Hill, maybe his terrible experience story, which is interesting because the experience was more or less the same as all of his other bookings, except this one had a mugshot involved. Oh, and a bond. He had to post bond. Anyway, maybe that's legitimately worse than the other bookings, and we don't need to bother with the story. But, I already forgot what else was. Oh, yeah, right. The mugshot being released to the public. It is a public domain thing. I have already heard, and we could have guessed that Trump is already selling T-shirts and probably coffee mugs, with the mugshot on it. I mean, it's worth a try for him to try and do that. But remember, if you want to get to him, that's a public domain photo. He doesn't have any ownership rights in it, even though it is his likeness. The best thing to do, the thing that would bother him the most is if everybody else made money off of this too. Not just his enemies either. I think it would make him angry if his friends were making money off it. So if you've been looking for a fun project for the weekend, or you wanted to try out Cafe Press, go grab that mugshot and make your own thing and do something fun with it. Lots of people have done great manipulations of the photos already. So there are some creative people out there, possibly too much time on their hands, who could be making a mint, or at least $6 to $11 probably, by selling those mugs. I have seen some very interesting ones out there, including, people have made them up as Batman villains. I did see somebody take one and put some sort of screening over it, and so that it looked like the window of a microwave oven, actually, and saying, "This is what my chicken nuggets see at 3 a.m. while I'm waiting for them to finish cooking." That scowl while they're waiting. I thought that was one of the more clever uses of the photo. So there you go. That's all out there. And you should look it all up and find all the interesting things. So as I mentioned, it is also Armando's birthday. He's planning to drop by. We'll see whether everything holds together. He'll drop by, I think, in the 10 o'clock hour. We have no particular agenda about what to discuss, but of course there's all the Trump news and the courtroom wrangling and the 14th Amendment ideas and yada yada. But I can set the table with some other stuff and get to some things that have been waiting in the wings for a while. There's a lot to share, and maybe I'll do this. There's a story that now reaches me through multiple sources, multiple being, I think, 2, possibly 3, But at any rate, my brother Mark shared this one with me this morning, and it's the same story that John Shiflett has been sharing and tried several times to kind of break through the clutter and get us to cover the story. And it is relevant to stuff we've discussed before. And if I recall correctly, unless I'm mistaken, John may have mentioned, well, I'll just check in here and we'll read the story and we'll check up with John in just a second. Oh, I've gotten a message here from Armando trying to see. Okay. And he's it's been a long time since he called in, so I guess he's checking on the logistics of it all. And we'll see. Oh, maybe he's ready earlier than okay, just checking who to call and which buttons to press. But okay. In the meantime, then, let's read this story that John sent, and I think I read from him when one of the earlier times that he was sharing the story, and he was trying to share it via Mastodon, and Mastodon was a little screwy the last couple of days, so he shared it through a couple of other channels. And was he saying that he may have something to do with or work where the story was produced? Is that right? Or maybe not right? I am not sure. Anyway, I'll read you this. The point is the story. And I'll go back to the original sharing of it from, let's see, what's the publication date is August 21st. So it's been waiting around a little while. And it's about the phenomenon of the constitutional sheriffs. We have mentioned these guys before. This is like sort of like some sort of cross between sovereign citizen type thought and QAnon thought, but for law enforcement. How fun. What a great combination. So the original source I have for it is from the Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting. I think this is another sort of joint project that, various journalistic outlets and schools have put together. And it's now running as an AP piece. That's how I saw it shared with me this morning, and that sort of hammered home the importance of reading it to you today. So here's the headline from the original version. Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting. God-given rights, the nationwide spread of the, quote, constitutional sheriff. So, who are our authors here? I've got some names to try to work through here. T.J. Leroux, I'm guessing it's the French, L'Heureux. So, apologies for my French. Adrian Washington, easy enough to pronounce. Albert Sterna Jr., Anissa Shabir, and Isaac Stone Simonelli, perhaps Simonelli. And at any rate, kudos to them for putting together this investigative report. The place is labeled here. The story runs with an explainer up at the top, displaying both the logos of both the Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting and the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism. So that this project, In the Sheriff We Trust, is what they call the project, was produced by the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism in collaboration with the Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting. The Howard Center is based at Arizona State University's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and is an initiative of the Scripps Howard Fund in honor of the late news industry executive and pioneer Roy W. Howard. The Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting is an independent, nonpartisan newsroom dedicated to statewide data-driven investigative reporting. And after all of that, Arizona, our dateline, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Well, okay. It's investigative reporting about stuff that happens all over the place. So, okay, let's see. We've got this. Against the background hum of the convention center, Dar Leaf. Everyone remembers Dar Leaf, right? And he just was wrapped up in the case made eventually against all of the election fabricators in Michigan in the last couple of weeks. Dar Leaf settled into a club chair to explain the sacred mission of America's sheriffs. his bright blue eyes and warm smile belying the intensity of the cause. Unless, of course, you think he has the visage of a rather more rotund than usual White Walker. But anyway, the sheriff is supposed to be protecting the public from evil. Evil, really. The chief law enforcement officer for Barry County, Michigan, said during a break in the National Sheriff's Association 2023 conference, when your government is evil or out of line, that's what the sheriff is there for, protecting them from that. Yeah, well, the sheriff of Nottingham, maybe, but I don't think so. And he didn't do a particularly good job of it. By the way, the AP version of this story runs under the headline. It's important to frame it this way, I think. A right-wing sheriff's group that challenges federal law is gaining acceptance around the country. I mean, they are, and it's important to say so. I wanted to use that AP headline here. Leaf is on the advisory board of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, founded in 2011 by former Arizona Sheriff Richard Mack. The group, known as CSPOA, I don't know whether they try to say CISPOA or anything like that, but CSPOA teaches that the elected sheriffs must, quote, protect their citizens from the overreach of an out-of-control federal government, unquote, by refusing to enforce any law they deem unconstitutional or, quote, unjust. Why do they think they have that power? Because it's awesome to have that power, so they tell everybody they've got it. The safest way to actually achieve that is to have local law enforcement understand that they have no obligation to enforce such laws. Mack said in an interview, they're not laws at all anyway. If they're unjust laws, they are laws of tyranny. I mean, this does eventually settle at the level of if the flag in the courtroom has gold fringe, that's how you know it's a fake courtroom and you don't have to listen to the judge or obey the laws from there. Why do you say so? 'Cause I don't wanna. And there's gold fringe, so why not? The sheriff's group has railed against gun control laws, COVID-19 mask mandates, and public health restrictions, as well as alleged election fraud, which is no different from your local Mama Bears group anyway. But I don't know. They'll get all upset because they have big hats and guns and they don't like being referred to as mamas. Anyway, it has also quietly spread its ideology across the country, seeking to become more mainstream, in part by securing state approval for taxpayer-funded law enforcement training, the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism found. And here's the real important angle here. Things that we've pointed out lately, like state statutes that mandate that the NRA essentially make money every time somebody wants to be trained for a concealed carry permit, or the recent case in which a judge required that the attorneys for Southwest Airlines undergo some sort of religious freedom sensitivity training, but the training had to be provided by the one or another of the right-wing litigation groups, which has nothing to do with religious freedom directly. But, again, just sort of Republicans using the power of government when it can compel money to be spent, to spend it on their right-wing kooky interest groups. And that's how they're essentially then stealing taxpayer money to underwrite their craziness and lend it legitimacy. That's why this is an important story. Over the last 5 years, the group has hosted trainings, rallies, speeches, and meetings in at least 30 states for law enforcement officers, political figures, private organizations, and members of the public, according to the Howard Center's 7-month probe conducted in collaboration with the Arizona Center for Investigative Reporting. This also reminds you probably of stories you may remember of leveraging government power to free up taxpayer dollars to be spent paying right-wing anti-Muslim ideologues to travel around the country and speak to law enforcement organizations and tell them that the truth about Islam is that they worship some sort of pagan moon god and they're all sworn by blood oath to terrorism. And anytime you see somebody who might be Muslim or you suspect that they might live near a Muslim, you should round them up as terrorists, beat them, and send them to Guantanamo. And that's God's orders. And but don't worry about that. If you think that's a little bit weird, the FBI paid for me to come and tell you this. So if you're a secularist, you can just say the FBI says that all of this stuff is true. You know, it's nuts, and it's a huge problem. The group has held formal trainings on its, quote, constitutional curriculum for law enforcement officers in at least 13 of those states. In 6 states, the training was approved for officers' continuing education credits. The group also has supporters who sit on 3 state boards in charge of law enforcement training standards. Legal experts warn that such training, especially when it's approved for state credit, can undermine the democratic process enshrined in the U.S. Constitution and is part of a, quote, broader insurrectionist ideology, unquote, that has gripped the nation since the 2020 presidential election. They have no authority, not under their state constitutions or implementing statutes, to decide what's constitutional and what's not constitutional. That's what courts have the authority to do, not sheriffs, said Mary McCord, a former federal prosecutor and executive director of the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection at Georgetown University. There's another sort of evil lurking there, McCord said, because CSPOA is now essentially part of a broader movement in the United States to think it's okay to use political violence if we disagree with some sort of government policy. At least one state, Texas, if you can believe it, canceled credit for the sheriff's training after determining the course content, which it said included a reference to "this is a war," was more political than educational. But other states, such as Tennessee, have approved the training in part because it was hosted by a local law enforcement agency. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. By the way, I do see from the Daily Beast that it is confirmed Jeffery Clark did in fact surrender as he was supposed to. It says here in the headline, just hours before the deadline. The deadline was noon today, and now is hours before the deadline, so I don't know. And I'm skimming, and I don't see anything that looks like it tells me exactly what the time was. But, yeah, he was the last holdout and making motions to allow himself to have either an extension or whatever, and it was denied. And I guess rather than make an enemy of the judge, he probably showed up and got his booking. And he may have tried to make some sort of claims that he was simply meeting the order of the court, but not subjecting himself, not conceding that he was subject to the personal jurisdiction of Fulton County courts. But I don't know. We'll see what kind of trickery he tried to, or thought he was trying to pull. But at any rate, he did surrender and get his mugshot, and so that's good news. Now back to the crazy sheriffs and what they're doing. Interesting, as we pointed out here, Texas, of all states, did have such a training scheduled and canceled it. because they thought it was overly political, which I'm glad they were able to figure that out. Tennessee, on the other hand, figured it out and said, well, that's why we're doing it, probably. Although they said that their excuse was, well, the training was hosted by a local law enforcement agency. And I mean, that's funny because that's the same psychosis that's sort of at the basis of this whole problem. As like, well, they said that, and then what? Like, did you do a double take when they said that? Well, we're allowing it because it was hosted by a local law enforcement agency. Well, they're all hosted by local law enforcement agencies. The training is taking place on the ground in that state. And the people who are going to it are local law enforcement agents. What difference does that make? They're just hoping that it's like hand waving. Well, local law enforcement agent, local, right? That's like farm to table law enforcement. That's obviously a good thing. People love that. And so therefore it's pure and unadulterated, except, you know, again, the whole concept of this constitutional sheriff's thing is we can basically do whatever we want. And we say so because we're local elected officials, as though that too were some magical potion of some kind. Well, you know, could you be a crazy idiot who doesn't know what he's talking about, but you're local? Sure. Everybody's got local ones of those. Not everybody chooses to elect them sheriff, but I mean, when you do, it doesn't mean they're smarter or have any more authority or can do this stuff and get away with it legitimately any more than anybody else. But they like to say so. So there you have it. Now, all right, we'll continue on here. Unlike other law enforcement continuing education, such as firearms training, the sheriff, for which they have to pay the NRA, the sheriff's curriculum is largely a polemic on the alleged constitutional underpinnings of sheriff's absolute authority to both interpret and refuse to enforce certain laws. You know, an authority which is claimed, but which exists in writing nowhere other than what they've written about themselves. And the founders, the venerated founders, have nothing to say about sheriffs at all, as I can recall. Anyway, one brochure advertising the group's seminars states, quote, "The county sheriff is the one who can say to the feds, beyond these bounds, you shall not pass." I mean, he can say it and even have a handlebar mustache when he does. It just doesn't mean anything. Since 2018, the Howard Center and Arizona CIR investigation found at least 69 sheriffs, that's a nice number, 69 sheriffs nationwide have either been identified as members of the group or publicly supported it, though at least one later disavowed the organization. A 2021 survey of sheriffs by academic researchers working with the nonprofit Marshall Project found that more than 200 of the estimated 500 sheriffs who responded agreed with the group's ideology. I mean, sheriffs are relatively conservative people by most accounts anyway. And I guess basically if you're asking them, do you believe that there's a constitutional provision granting you the ultimate authority as law enforcement officers in the United States, and you can basically make the call personally whether things are constitutional or not? Well, you know, the good news is about 300 out of the 500 sheriffs said, no, I've read a book. And 200, though, of the 500 sheriffs said, ultimate authority for me? Yes, please, I'll take one of those. All right, back to the story. Amy Cooter, research director at the Middlebury Institute Center on Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism. No relation, I don't think, to Cooter from the Dukes of Hazzard. I think that was his first name. But at any rate, you never know. But, you know, that was a law enforcement program, as you know. The Dukes of Hazzard was very heavily about law enforcement. A little on the law and order side, right? There's the police who investigate the crimes and the Duke boys who commit them, but for fun. And everyone loves them. And isn't it cute that they have a racist flag on the hood of their car? And the doors don't work. Anyway, Amy Cooter, research director for the Middlebury Institute Center on everything having to do with terrorism, said many sheriffs joined the group from, quote, a misinformed but well-meaning perspective. That's very nice of you, Amy. But she added it also allows some sheriffs to, quote, potentially engage in extremism by not enforcing legal, lawful, legitimate orders. Yes. That's what it is. Nationwide, there are some 3,000 sheriffs whose salaries are funded by taxpayers. All their salaries are funded by taxpayers, but they're just pointing that out, and I read that funny. They serve as the chief law enforcement officers in their counties and are the only elected peace officers in the country. They appoint deputy sheriffs and jailers and service the courts in their jurisdictions. Sheriffs hold immense sway over what happens in their county, especially in rural ones. Some states have pushed back against the group's training efforts, and not all sheriffs subscribe to the group's ideology. Many at the National Sheriffs Association conference distanced themselves from the constitutional sheriffs or claimed not to know what they were about. When I took an oath 17 years ago as sheriff, I took the oath to uphold the Constitution, not overstep it, said Troy Wellman, sheriff of Moody County, South Dakota, and a vice president of the National Sheriffs Association. And there has been public pushback in some counties led by constitutional sheriffs in, what am I looking at? It's in Washington State. Klickitat, maybe? That's how it's spelled anyway. No idea how you would pronounce it differently, but Klickitat County, Washington. Residents alleged Sheriff Bob Songer, I don't know. It looks like Songer, a board member of the sheriff's group, engaged in fear-mongering and intimidation. As long as that's mongering, I don't mind so much. He was the target of a formal complaint in 2022 that the state's law enforcement standards agency ultimately dismissed for lack of jurisdiction, which is amazing because, of course, the constitutional sheriffs believe they have jurisdiction over everything. The public-facing image of the sheriff's group, which is led by white men, surprising no one, prominently features the American flag and the experiences of black civil rights icons who pushed back against unjust laws. But details of its operations are closely held, and its finances are shielded from public scrutiny. It was briefly registered as a nonprofit in Arizona, but internal records indicate that it is now a private company. That's at least a little bit more honest. But yeah, of course, they're hiding behind, it's probably largely a den of white supremacists looking for ways to justify not arresting their friends, but arresting anybody who says, hey, these sheriffs are kind of crazy and maybe a little bit out of control. We should be able to arrest them, but we'll hide behind civil rights icons, the black civil rights leaders who rightly claimed that Jim Crow laws were unjust. See? There's where it's good to disobey unjust laws. We're that. That's what we're doing. All right. The group does not release a list of its dues-paying members, and they probably all, fake paying their dues or use taxpayer money to pay them anyway. Nor does it publicize information about where or how it conducts trainings because of how law enforcement-y they are. The sympathies of the group's leaders for right-wing, white nationalist extremist causes, however, are well documented. Mack was an early board member of the Oath Keepers, the group involved in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, among other things. Although he said he split with the group several years ago when it became a militia, that's probably why he joined it, Mack still speaks at Oath Keeper-affiliated rallies, so that's a big lie. Leaf was investigated but not charged. Oh, is that right? In connection with the Michigan Attorney General's investigation into the alleged illegal seizure and breach of vote counting machines in 2020. He also appeared at an election denier rally with two men later charged in the conspiracy to kidnap Michigan's Democratic governor, Gretchen Whitmer. He just hangs out with lots of interesting guys because of how constitution-y he is. Michael Peroutka, another Sheriff's Group board member and former candidate for Maryland's Attorney General, was once affiliated with the League of the South, which Maryland really wasn't in anyway, which supports a free and independent Southern Republic. At a 2019 Sheriff's Training event, he said, "There is a creator God. Our rights come from him." Which he didn't even capitalize here. The purpose of civil government is to secure and defend God-given rights. But you don't have to worry about them because they're God-given and there's nothing you can do to destroy them. But God occasionally needs help from sheriffs, it seems. John Lewis, not that John Lewis, but John Jon Lewis, a research fellow at George Washington University's program on extremism. It's really a program probably against extremism, but, You don't want to get too awkward in naming these things. He described the sheriff's group as insidious and said that it had become mainstream standard bearers for entrance into more violent forms of extremism. Great, through the sheriffs. Just because it's not as overt in their subversion of the democratic system, and it is really, just because it's quieter about how it does it and what it's calling for, they're not, doesn't make the ideas any less dangerous, said Lewis. Next section here, national expansion. Ready? I don't know how come it starts this way, but it does. 2 heart attacks. Plans for a book about sheriffs and the pandemic. And a new board position at the right-wing political organization America's Frontline Doctors. These were the reasons Mack cited in November of 2022 for stepping down as head of the daily operations for the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, records show. Mack tapped far-right radio personality, Sam Bushman, to replace him as chief executive officer, although Mack remains board chairman and retains all authority. That's really distancing yourself. Bushman runs Liberty News Radio, which syndicates white supremacist programs across the country, including the pro-Confederate show Political Cesspool, which hosted former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke as recently as May 20th, 2023. He declined to answer reporters' written questions. By the way, those guys make a living doing that, and everybody else who's doing legitimate stuff or reporting on real news, for instance, no right-wing lunatic grift machine for us. Anyway, what we really need to do is to scale up our training. That's who we are. That's what we do, and the need for it has never been greater, Bushman said during a January 2023 board meeting. Most law enforcement officers are required to participate in taxpayer-funded continuing education to stay current on their certifications. True. Lawyers, too. Lots of professions have something like this, but the sheriff's officers, police officers, it's taxpayer-funded. Their whole jobs are taxpayer-funded, so the continuing education is taxpayer-funded, too, and that's important. Training typically focuses on keeping officers sharp in a number of skill sets, including using firearms, hooray, so they can shoot your dog, and encountering mental health situations, so they can shoot mentally ill people. To track the spread of the sheriff's group, the Howard Center filed public records requests with state law enforcement standards boards in 48 states and several sheriff's offices related to the group's training and communications with officials from 2018 to 2023. The latest records received were from early June 2023. That's not too old. In that time, the sheriff's group conducted training in at least 13 states. In at least 5 of those states, the training received continuing education credit, and in 6 of them, states' training regulation boards approved the sheriff's curriculum. An internal November 2022 email shows the sheriff's group claimed its training had been approved for accreditation in 7 states. And there's a map explaining the spread here and coded by what sort of acceptance things get. Here in Virginia, it says here that reporters identified approved CSPOA training available for credit in continuing education. It looks like that is the case in Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Montana. What a collection. And then there's sheriff's activity in several states and training, not necessarily for credit, although some of these things are checkered. Texas and Nevada both report. Let's see, Texas says training for credit, but the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement revoked their accreditation in May of 2023. And then in Nevada, courses offered for credit, but then after a Howard Center, Arizona CIR inquiry, Nye County Sheriff's Office petitioned Nevada's Peace Officer Standards and Training to decertify CSPOA trainings submitted by the previous sheriff. No word on the outcome there. But other training being provided in Wyoming, South Dakota, Illinois, Kansas, Oklahoma, and, of course, Florida, with activity in several other states. Reporters also found that members and affiliates of the sheriff's group sit on the law enforcement regulatory boards in Arizona, Florida, and Maine. These state training boards determine what officers are taught and which law enforcement philosophies to adopt. In Florida, board approval is required for training to receive continuing education credit. Lessons must be certified by a state's training board in order for officers to receive credit in at least 30 states, reporters found, but approval is not necessary for official credit in at least 16 states, so they'll be targeting those, I'm sure. The laws pertaining to oversight of law enforcement trainings vary across states according to a review of the law enforcement standards and training oversight agencies in each state and the District of Columbia. Mack claimed in a November 2022 conference call that his organization had trained close to 1,000 sheriffs nationwide, in addition to an unspecified number of deputies, undersheriffs, and police chiefs. Experts caution such figures can be inflated, but as Mack noted, it is nearly impossible to know how many deputies have learned about the organization's philosophy through someone who attended a training. Leaf, the 58-year-old Michigan sheriff, said he brings back to his command what he learns during the sheriff's trainings because, quote, it's very important. I have my sergeants on board with my philosophies. The recordings of the Sheriff's Advisory Board meetings make clear that a new strategy has emerged focused on holding trainings near where board members are based, thus minimizing the travel needed to conduct them. Bushman said they would like to see active members, including board members and sheriffs, conduct those trainings in their locales. Gaining state-sponsored accreditation also remains a focus of the group, board discussions show. We can scale up more of these events to get out more training faster. It takes certifications in the state to do that, Bushman said in a January meeting. The group's then National Director of Administration, Tanya Benson, said in a November 22 email to board members and supporters that the more states we can get approval and accreditation for the curriculum, the better. She added, the best way to get approval is for a friendly sheriff to submit the request. Experts say the formal trainings give the sheriff's ideas a facade of authority, as well as provide an opportunity to reach a greater target audience, law enforcement officials. If I'm a young police officer and I have somebody standing in front of me, in a law enforcement uniform, telling me the law, that I'm allowed to interpret the law the way I choose or the way he suggests, how am I supposed to believe that that's improper if that person is duly certified under the state's authority? Asked Michael German, a fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program, who spent 16 years as an FBI agent. It validates their false information in a way that will make it harder for rank-and-file officers to resist it, German said, adding that when law enforcement officers are, quote, allowed to interpret the law as they see fit, the chances for error and abuse go way up. Next section, partial pushback. Despite its spread, the group has faced pushback in some states, including in Texas, where it claimed in December of 2021 to have trained about 1/5 of the state's 254 sheriffs. After news reports revealed the extent of the group's involvement with Texas sheriffs, the state agency that regulates law enforcement training investigated and then banned future constitutional sheriffs' training for credit. The group's training was best categorized as political discourse, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement wrote in a May 26, 2023 letter to Mack. In Illinois, where roughly 90% of the state's sheriffs vowed not to enforce the state's new ban on semi-automatic weapons, a state official declined to give officers credit for the constitutional sheriff's training, saying the material wasn't filed early enough and the state already taught constitutional concepts. This is a good excuse as any. Nebraska's Police Standards Advisory Council told reporters it could not certify the sheriff group's training because it considered the group to be a political organization, and the agency avoids any such affiliation. Even so, trainings don't need approval in Nebraska, and the state's sheriffs may independently partner with the Constitutional Sheriffs Group. And that's what's happened in Tennessee. That state's law enforcement standards board must approve training for credit, but officials also said they approve trainings hosted by local sheriff's offices, regardless of content. So that's a great loophole for them. We just have to find the right sheriff or right person who can kind of push that through, Benson, the group's national director of administration, said in a January board meeting recording. It's kind of a simple process. It just takes someone to kind of babysit it, hound dog it, and be on top of it to get the approval. Lieutenant Joseph Gill, director of training for Madison County Sheriff's Office in Tennessee, became the right person. A July 11th, 2023 training was approved by Tennessee's Law Enforcement Commission as required for accreditation. It wasn't really a training. I mean, he, Richard Mack, just came and spoke, said Max Millam, a training specialist in the sheriff's office. The Tennessee approval came despite the fact that the sheriff's group had declined to provide its presentation materials. Instead, it provided an outline comparing its philosophy with that of civil rights leaders such as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. I'm sure it's a lot like that. Civil disobedience has an honorable tradition in the United States, German noted, but the government's not allowed to engage in civil disobedience, and as government officials, they actually have a duty to comply with the law. That's probably the best way of cutting through the nonsense that I've seen so far. Yes, you compare yourself to dissident civil rights leaders, but peaceful non-compliance or whatever, and as any sort of dissent like that, that's a right that belongs to people as against the government. The government basically has to be the government. You can protest it as a private citizen, but as a law enforcement officer or a constitutional officer, you're kind of bound at some level anyway to at least uphold the position of the government, so that, you know, even if you're holding it up so that it can be challenged in court and knocked down. But yeah, the idea, civil disobedience isn't something that the government engages in. That's for outside private citizens to do. And it's not even guaranteed that that's safe. But at any rate, Washington State has been the scene of the most organized pushback against the sheriff's group, reporters found. During their 2021-22 legislative session, lawmakers empowered Washington's police oversight agency to hold law enforcement officers accountable for their affiliations with extremist groups. The agency must now expand required background checks to include any extremist affiliations and revoke an officer's license for misconduct. I don't think it's a big stretch to say that when we've got folks now literally with the power to kill someone, that we should expect them to adhere to a very high standards of behavior, of impartiality, said Jamie Peterson, a state senator from Seattle who sponsored the new law. Internal working group emails revealed the challenges in developing a workable definition of domestic extremism. Regulators agreed such groups seek to undermine the democratic process through violence or intimidation, or promote the idea that their interpretation of the law supersedes those of any other federal, state, or local authority. One of our issues was, beyond the Patriot Front and Proud Boys and Klan members and all of that, was the CSPOA. Olympia attorney Leslie Cushman referring to the sheriff's group. Cushman helped advise legislators on behalf of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, a group of advocates and people who have lost loved ones to police violence. Of grave concern is the relationship of the CSPOA to the Oath Keepers, Cushman wrote in a March 3rd, 2022 email to the working group. The sheriff's group had made inroads in Washington state in early 2021 when it hosted 2 events there. In February of 2022, the state's Law Enforcement Training Commission received a complaint from a group of unnamed residents about Songer, the Klickitat County sheriff, since 2014. Apologies again for the pronunciation, if any. It alleged instances in which Songer amplified baseless rumors about anti-racism activists and used a local radio show to name people critical of his policies. Songer is also created a posse, as he calls it, of nearly 150 citizen volunteers, and he told the federal government in 2021 to, quote, stay out of our county, after the Justice Department called on the FBI to work with federal prosecutors on threats of violence against school officials. The complaint cited Songer's alleged support for extremist organizations such as Patriot Prayer, which rallies with members of the Proud Boys, and with the People's Rights Network, founded by Ammon Bundy, who led a 40-day standoff with federal authorities in 2016. Songer confirmed he attended meetings for People's Rights Network and Patriot Prayer, but said he didn't know Patriot Prayer had ties to Proud Boys. Having an extreme right organization dictate our local county official, it puts a stamp of approval on, discrimination and racism, said Lynn Mason, also a Klickitat County resident. And this during his campaign against Songer during his 2022 re-election bid. All right, so the ringy-dingy noise that you heard just a minute ago is Armando joining us for the second hour of the show. We're not quite there yet, but we're so for pre-break. So hang on just a second, Armando. Except I'll chime in to say, hey, happy birthday! How do you like your present?
Hey, happy birthday to you too. Oh, I don't know why I thought the break was at 9:55. I apologize.
No problem. Everybody knows that we do things non-professionally here. But
so nothing's changed.
Yeah, really, not much. And we might as well use this as our break to jump into everything. This is a very long and there's a lot more to this article, but it's interesting, and I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention since it is an important topic and something you should keep an eye on. We've talked about it a little bit in the past. The constitutional sheriff's movement is the subject of this article that I'm reading today. It reminds me that I've also had in pocket and waiting for sharing an article about another network of right-wing lunatics that occasionally gets trotted out, and that there's now new financial support for getting people out to let's see if I can find this article. This time funding a bunch of Gen Z influencers for the purpose of coming to the support of Ken Paxton, who now faces, I think he's still facing impeachment down in Texas, the Attorney General of Texas. But interesting, just as sort of a small-scale project that these guys do. But in addition to funding the constitutional sheriffs, they're trying to get at them through the kids, I guess, through various, influencers who ordinarily make YouTube videos about video games and how to pick up girls, because, and they mean girls too, not women. But apparently they think that's another route into creating a nationwide network of lunatics who believe that the laws and constitutions apply to little people and not them.
Gather some afterwards.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just discussing our little strategy. Where are we going to go with all this? And as you know, being our birthday, you can do whatever you want. So, but the things which interest us, and I was wondering about this. I don't know if you have ever paid any attention, even just as a joke, to astrology sorts of things. But whenever I read, someone hands me something like it, or I read it in the newspaper or something, and they, well, what exactly is this? What do they say about people born in this? I don't know why it makes any sense that being born at a certain time of year would mean anything, but. And usually astrology stuff is written so generally that everybody can read it and say, oh, yeah, that does apply to me. But but it's like going to a Uri Geller show or something, really. A mentalist who just sort of manipulates you. But what they do say about Virgos, I think this explains a lot of the nature of the show. Really. The fact that almost everybody affiliated is born within a couple of days. If that were ever really to hold any influence over behavior, I think that would explain a lot. So, let's see. We were just chatting about what's been going on. Of course, Trump booked, and to no one's surprise, that's not particularly of any interest except for saying, haha, that's funny, he got booked, and everybody now can pass around mugshots of the president. But what is more important, and you've been spending your time with, reading through the various indictments against Trump and others, or at least that's how you've described it to me. So let's see. How do we want to jump into this discussion? What's been on your mind about those things?
I think one of the things that people, they get caught up in the daily headline, and so makes this argument or says this, and it's a witch hunt and whatever daily talking point and discussion of Oh, well, this newspaper article got it
No,
wrong.
yeah, right.
I think those are just weeds. I think if take for example the January 6th trial,
Okay, yeah.
Jack Smith, which as opposed to the Georgia case, which really threw in everything in the kitchen sink, is pretty narrowly drawn. I mean, it has a lot of narrative, but at the end of the day, when you look at what the charges are, they're basically obstruction of an official proceeding. The 1512 C and K conspiracy to do so.
Yeah.
Those cases are really going to focus on the submission of the false electors slates. Now, you may or may not remember, we talked about that stuff all the time in December 2020, and we followed the safe harbor and what was being submitted to the archives and so on and so forth.
Right.
And when you get there, if there's a trial, I know Smith has asked for January, but let's say it's in March. And there's going to be a lot of talk and this and that. But okay, but say the trial starts March 1st. They say, look, Donald Trump conspired to obstruct the proceeding of the vote count by submitting false electors to federal agencies.
Right. Okay.
And as stated, that's all true.
Yes.
And that's the case. It's over. He's guilty.
All right. Awesome.
I'm serious.
Let's start now. Yeah.
People complicate this, but the reason that there's some interesting things that came out of Georgia is that David Schaefer, who was the Georgia Republican Party head, and now a guy named Sean Still, who was also part of the fake elector story in Georgia, and I'm sure this repeated in other states, basically say, look, Trump's attorneys told us to do this.
Yeah. And, there's the sort of side story of, well, they told us at first it was only going to be used if they managed to prevail in their cases against the way the election was administered in various states. And then they said, oh, well, we lost, so screw all of that. We're just going to use them anyway for some other reason.
I know that's what they were told, but interestingly, at least in Georgia, as I've read it, Schaefer and Still and others mailed the fake electoral slates to the archives.
Yeah. Which
they did it. I mean, maybe they were told to do it, and they said,
but
this doesn't really matter unless we win. Well, that doesn't matter. You can't submit a false document to the federal government in order to impact a proceeding. I mean, it's just pretty straightforward. I mean, they did it because they wanted them to be counted, and nobody withdrew them.
Right.
Nobody said, hey, wait a second, you shouldn't look at those anymore. Because we
lost the case. Right. They said instead, well, sure, we lost the case, but what if you decided that the vice president had the authority to reopen the case, or to simply say, to hell with the case, we're counting the other guys? Could we try that? Ultimately, no. Pence said, no, we can't.
No, you really couldn't even. You just can't submit false documents.
Well, I mean, they eventually changed their mind about why they were, or I don't know. They may have changed their mind about why they were submitting them, but they were invalid and illegal in both instances, so it doesn't really matter. I know they keep pointing to Hawaii in 1960, but it's just a very poor analogy.
It's a bad analogy for a couple of reasons. First of all, I have to say that I think what the Hawaii Kennedy electors did was wrong. I mean, they should not have done it. And there's a problem for anybody that wants to equate. 1512, the section 1512 of the 18 USC, which is the relevant criminal code, was not enacted until 1982.
Okay, that's one thing.
So you couldn't charge them with that if you were so inclined, because it didn't exist, number one.
Right.
Number two, the difference is, as I understand it, and this is what Schaefer says in his filing to remove David Schaefer, just to repeat, is the Georgia Republican Party head who was charged in the Georgia case, and he's moved to have the case heard in federal court under a federal officer removal statute. Obviously, he's not a federal officer.
Right.
His argument is that because he was an elector, or alternatively because he was following the direction of the president of the United States at the time, Donald Trump, he's like a federal officer.
Yes.
I don't think that argument's going to work. But
it's a new kind of federal officer removal. I spoke to a federal officer, so
right. I impersonated a federal officer. Then I'm covered.
Yeah.
So, but
it's
it's a bad argument. But I'm actually focused on what he's saying about saying I did it because Trump told me to do it. And what does that do? Of course, that means that Trump is part of that conspiracy.
Yes. Or that he's been deputized by his having spoken to him. That's his other thing.
Or he's a constitutional sheriff.
Right, exactly. I was deputized because I spoke with him. And by the way, he also declassified the whole thing somehow. So presidents can declassify. They can turn any citizen into a federal officer by calling them on the phone or texting them. Sure.
Trump says, I don't know that guy. I never met him before. Now, he has met Shane, but say Sean still.
Okay.
But those guys had Trump's lawyer, Ray Smith, who's also indicted, in the room.
Yes.
And they did. And there's a transcript. They had a court reporter there.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They had to have a transcript of the well, I guess I don't know that they have to have a transcript of the meeting
at all. They just
have to produce documentation. But oddly, they decided to take a transcript.
Effing criminal conspiracy.
That's right. I have been to a vote of the Electoral College, by the way. So I have personally witnessed one in Virginia. And although I couldn't swear to you that there wasn't a court reporter on the floor, that wasn't a part of the proceeding. One. Yeah, doesn't render it illegal or anything because you had one. It's just a question of why would you do that exactly, especially given what you were doing. All right, well, you have a record of it. Thank you. I'm glad, I guess.
And the funny thing about it is that he's also charged, incidentally, Schaefer, with having lied to Georgia investigators when he said there wasn't a court reporter there. Now, why would he lie about that if there was a court reporter there?
Especially if you've got the transcript. Well, where did this come from? I don't know.
I don't know if they had the transcript when they asked him the question, but it was bizarre that he would take the turn of lying about it because that's an independent felony too.
I guess, yeah, I guess you're right. I could imagine where, okay, I didn't know we had one. We do have one? Oh, okay. Well, I said we didn't have one because I didn't. Why would you have one? I don't know. Why did you?
It was his meeting. I'm pretty sure he's the one who called for the court reporter.
I don't know. Yeah, right. I made my assistant
show up in places and start recording.
Freelance court reporters that just wander the streets saying, "You want a transcript of that?"
Oh, or no, I'll just sit here. It's like the guy who takes your picture and tries to offer
you
a photo.
All right, like at an amusement park.
No, but
lawyer land.
But in the thing, Trump's lawyer, and I believe he was Trump's lawyer. I'm not 100%. I don't have his engagement letter or anything, but he said, "I'm Trump's lawyer. I need
Paperwork.
You to do this."
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, people could forget. I had my assistant arrange the meeting, whatever. So, all right, it's possible he gets off on the charge of lying to investigators about whether or not there was a court reporter engaged, but it won't matter very much. He was one, and here's the transcript, and that proves a number of other felonies. So let's concentrate on those.
It's bizarre, and
it is odd.
I don't think he's denied delivering or transmitting to the archives and the district court in Georgia, all the different places that the Electoral Count Act requires you to do.
Right.
That's submitting a false document. And so that's also an independent crime. But the purpose of it was to impede or obstruct an official proceeding, which if you followed all these January 6th cases, this has been pretty well litigated. The vote count is an official proceeding covered under 1512C. And here's the kicker. There's a 20-year sentence on that.
There should be. I mean, it's one of the ultimate crimes you can perpetrate against the United States. The Electoral College we all think of as this archaic joke, and it kind of is one. But because of the way it works and because of who designed it, I mean, it's pretty well enshrined in the Constitution. And I did notice, I don't know how much you really want to place in it. But when I was reading over the 14th Amendment, not written by the same people, but Section 3 outlining, the people excited about using it to disqualify Donald Trump. What is interesting is that they list several officers by the name of their positions, and then just generally say everybody is subject to it. But of the named positions, it's senators, representatives, and then members of the Electoral College. And then everybody else, president, whatever, judges, et cetera, et cetera. They're called out. That's the importance that, at least at the time of the framing of the 14th Amendment, right after the Civil War, people placed on, they were like, this would be a travesty if people just forged identification as electors and said the president is somebody else. That's outrageous. We absolutely, positively cannot allow that. Throw that in there. Okay. And then 150 years later, people are like, not only should we do it, we should get a court reporter to record our meeting doing it.
You mentioned Hawaii, and I just wanted to complete the thought on Hawaii. The thing that's also different about Hawaii is that I believe that the electoral, I know this part is true, that the recertification, the one with the Kennedy electors, was submitted by the governor of Hawaii.
Yes. And that's
it has been a recount. The court ordered it. This is what happened. Ergo, we are correcting our original certification, and here's our new one.
Yes. It wasn't that they were so much that they were submitting to and saying, you decide. It was, I don't know, maybe they didn't submit any paperwork withdrawing the previous one, but this one was supplanting the previous submission signed by the governor.
I believe that the governor of Hawaii actually did say exactly that. Said,
you would think.
Sorry, we have a new certification by court order.
Yes. Okay. So that makes the most sense.
One of the weird things about the Electoral Count Act that we discussed too much last year or 2 years ago is very flawed, and it's been reformed and it's better. One of the reforms that they've now done, which wasn't in place at the time, is the Section 5 safe harbor provision. I don't know if anybody even remembers this anymore.
We remember,
but it used to be if you submitted 6 days before the Electoral College, it's supposed to be conclusive, right? What does conclusive mean? It should be that you can't object to it. But, of course, Section 15 lets you object to it anyway. So the Electoral Count Act was a big mess anyway. In fact, it still is in that respect. And I'm not going to get into the reform of the Electoral Count Act. That gets too complicated. But the governor of Hawaii submitted it. He said, hey, this is by court order. I'm hereby submitting our corrected certification.
And that was missing from all of the fake electors because no governor would
at that
point dare do it.
No state authority
They
whatsoever.
were asked to, and they said no, or in some cases they refused to take the call on national television. Trump.
If you think about it, and you fast forward to in that time frame to Trump's call to Raffensperger, the January 2nd call, where he said, "Find me 11,780 votes." What was Trump really asking him to do? He's asking him to withdraw the certification that's already been processed and voted on by the Electoral College and the Georgia electors of the Electoral College, the true ones, and say, no, that was a mistake, and here's the real one, the ones where I win.
Yeah. So, he's trying to replicate, maybe in his mind, Hawaii, but then he needs the governor, not Raffensperger, but he was starting with
exactly
Raffensperger.
Right. The governor had to do the actual recertification, and the governor has to have
he would have called him next.
And Raffensperger didn't have the power to do any of these things, and neither did, at that time, Kemp. Georgia has a law. And I don't know if you remember all the arguments about the independent state legislature.
Sure.
Right? And the arguments come in two forms. The one about what they do with congressional districts. That's the one that went to the Supreme Court. But there's an analogous provision in Article 2, Section 1, Paragraph 2, which says that the electors will be chosen by each state in a manner designated by the state legislature.
Right, yes.
And the state legislature does that by passing a law.
Yeah, we'll have elections. Every state now has
elections. This is how we'll do it. If there's a dispute, you go through contests, and then it goes to this or that. And once it's final, the governor will do the certificate of ascertainment and then report the votes and all that. And all that had happened.
Yes.
And there was no court case saying, well, not all that was wrong. Now, it's true that Trump had filed on December 31st. Imagine that, on December 31st, 2 weeks after the Electoral College had already met.
Yes.
A case saying, hey, I contested, and he filed it in federal court.
Yeah, December 31st.
In state court. They had filed a petition no, that one was in federal court. They had filed one in state court, which sort of just died on the vine on December 7th, which is also very late, but be as it may. I mean, people don't remember, because you're not as old as me, the process in Florida in 2000. I mean, there were lawsuits like immediately.
Yes. December 31st is awfully late. And of course, famously a time when everybody in the courthouse is paying close attention to paperwork and moving it, as opposed to leaving early for the day and not coming back for a week.
Well, beyond that, there's just nothing can be done.
Yeah.
Everything's already happened. There's no relief I can grant you. Just to give you perspective, it was December 12th of 2000 that the Supreme Court ruled against Gore, and Gore made his concession speech. That's 17 days before Trump even files his lawsuit.
Yeah. All right. I mean, that I don't know what he thought he was waiting for, but he was
he
waiting for somebody
others and lost them all. He just filed another one that said the same nonsense. I mean, if you ever got there, it would have been dismissed as this has already been decided. Go away.
So he keeps doing it. This court decided it, but not that court. So I'm filing there.
So their theory was, hey, look, these aren't final. There's a case pending. Right, that's what their lawyers came up with. That's what
that's right.
Came up with.
There's actually something, I think, in the Jack Smith indictment that basically says that a lot of times the fake electors were saying, well, we're not going to do this. You told us it was only if we want to prevail in court. So I don't see a case pending, so you don't need us. So they went out and in one case, were like hours before the Electoral College met on December 14th, they filed the case so that they could say, here's the case you needed in order to meet. So this is a pattern of
they had that
conduct
one
as well.
For the meeting in December 14th, but then for the call with Raffensperger, they sued Raffensperger to stop him or to make him do something. It was just a nonsensical lawsuit. There was nothing to be done, nothing to be do. Just...
So he filed an extra one, I guess. Was that the December 31st one? So that when he called him on January 2nd or 3rd, he could say, well, there's a big question here. You should stop your work at a minimum, even if you won't find me the votes I need. You need to stop the certification. You need to try to withdraw it. You need anything we can come up with.
You have to withdraw it. He wanted an affirmative act, and Raffensperger had no power. He was asking him to do something illegal. And, of course, the sideshow, I spend a lot of time making fun of Jonathan Turley, but Jonathan Turley says, there's nothing wrong with asking for a recount. I said, there certainly isn't. And he got it. He got 3 of them.
Yeah.
And it was over.
Yeah.
And you asked through court processes, not on the phone. I mean, there's just something completely improper about picking up the phone and calling the guy anyway. I mean... But this is the part of the story that no one pays attention to. But as lawyers, you just don't call the judge, so to speak, and lean on him to have him decide in your favor. What if Trump had called the federal judge and said, "Hey, I need you to decide this case in my favor"? It's the same thing. Yeah.
Although, why Cleta Mitchell isn't in more trouble for that? I mean, I suppose if he was calling a judge, Cleta Mitchell might have found a reason to excuse herself from the room or something. She's apparently found a way to just skirt the line.
I guess she was careful not to be on the. Well, she was on that call. I guess she was on the call,
but she spoke a couple of times. But I guess she never said, "I need you to change the certification." She just, I guess, was there to lend factual support to claims that there was something wrong about how the election had been conducted, but she never spoke up and said, "I need you to change the outcome."
I'm not sure. I honestly, some people did less, I guess, and got away with it, and Willis
we'll see.
Decided not to indict Mitchell. I mean, Chesbro's the guy who invented the fake stuff. Eastman ran with it some of the way, but then Eastman, of course, went to the cockamamie Pence can do whatever he wants theory, and that's the one he was about.
Of course, every time they lose, it's a different excuse as to why it might still work, and then they create
I mean, it was crazy. But to go back to my original point, though, I think it's pretty clear. None of the facts that we've just discussed are really in dispute, right?
I've seen no one dispute them yet. I mean, maybe at trial they'll try, but not so far.
So they'll make some type of legal argument that somehow this is protected. I guess they're going to say First Amendment petitioning the government, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem with all of that, even if you were just talking, is unfortunately for them, in my view, and this is why I like Jack Smith's January 6th case. It's not complicated. He said, no, I'm focused. You did all these things, and your purpose was to obstruct or impede the official proceeding, the vote count.
Yeah. And
you did it by unlawful, corrupt means. What are the corrupt means? You submitted fake electors. You did. Yeah. Here they are. Now, well, what would Donald Trump say? Well, I had nothing to do with that, but wait a second. They have them saying, hey, how are we doing on the fake elector scheme?
And all the fake electors saying, I'm doing this because the president and the president's lawyers asked me to.
And all the president's lawyers saying, yes, we did ask them to. But we had good reasons. But the reasons aren't good. And there's no good, it's sort of the press got fixated on whether Trump believed he won the election and it was stolen. That's really irrelevant.
Yes.
That's irrelevant to the 1512 charges. It might be relevant on some level to the fraud charges because there's a conspiracy to defraud the United States charge and to violate people's civil rights. I'm not as well versed in that. I'm sure those are good claims. I just know the 1512 stuff is just 1, 2, 3. Yeah, it's okay. Why did you do it? I wanted to obstruct the vote count. How did you do it? Well, I submitted fake electors. And I told people to use that as the basis for obstructing and delaying the count. And indeed, everybody said at the time, all I want is for you to delay the count.
Yes.
And send it back to the states. Well, you just confessed of what you were trying to do.
It's funny. They think
the way you did it, which is corrupt because it's unlawful, you submitted fake electors.
Yeah. I guess they thought that was sort of a fallback position that somehow to them sounded less illegal than just handing the election over. All we want is a delay. Well, that was supposed to temper the worry that members of Congress had about it. But in fact, it was, a confession to a felony all itself. Yeah.
So
certainly just outright stealing the election would be worse.
I don't understand it all. I know that they produced 1 million pages of documents, but like a quarter of them are the Secret Service BS.
Oh, yes.
And a lot of it's replicative. So it's probably 400,000, probably 50,000 documents that actually matter. And I still think that's too many documents. I mean, just put in the stuff that we've just described. Here it is. Here's what he said. It's really, they're saying, it's going to take 3 weeks. Well, I don't know why it would take 3 weeks, but trials always take longer than you think, so that's fine.
Bait stamping takes forever.
So at the end of the day, it comes March, and it's March 25th, and the jury's out. It comes back, and it says guilty. Guilty.
As it should, yes.
How do you? What do you do then?
I don't know exactly.
I mean, as a, and I think of different
imprisoning
roles. So
him.
What does the media do? The Republican nominee for president is a convicted felon facing 20 years in jail.
Yeah. Put it in the subheadline.
Yeah. I mean, what do you say? I mean, he's convicted of 2 very serious crimes. I'm just taking the 1512s. I'm assuming, they acquitted him on everything else.
Okay.
What do you do?
Yeah.
And I don't know. Now, I don't know enough about Georgia law to know how well they have Trump there. I leave that to other people, but that's out there. And I do know a lot about the documents case. The documents case has two problems, though. I mean, that is actually the most slam dunk of slam dunk cases.
Yes,
the evidence is overwhelming.
I think so.
They've got him on it. They've got him on obstruction of justice. Right now, it's scheduled for trial in May. Let's play it out. Mm-hmm. He's been convicted already twice. And now we have another trial in May. And it goes to Fort Pierce, and it's got this Judge Cannon.
Right.
Who is not only a hack, she's really stupid. I mean, beyond stupid.
Okay.
But the evidence is what it is.
Yes. By the way, we have our break coming up, but
there's a jury, and a jury in the case is being seen in. It's a break.
It's coming up, but wrap up and we'll
in Fort
regroup.
Pierce, which is Trump country, and you definitely have a shot that you'll have a hung jury.
Entirely possible. Despite the fact that it's kind of an open and shut case, it'll be real interesting if it's presented correctly and you still have a hung jury. We'll be right back.
All right.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We have Armando still with us on the line for his birthday celebration, in which we get to talk about all this stuff. Yeah. Let's see, we left off. We're just sort of regrouping and reorienting our narrative about all the various Trump indictments and some of the issues swirling around them. Where do we leave off with this? We were just talking during the break.
I left off with was in my hypothetical, Trump had been convicted of 1512 in March.
And so now what do we
felonies carrying 20-year sentences, and how everybody reacts to that.
Okay.
And then it's not over, because then, as of today, there's scheduled a trial in Florida on the documents case, which, if you haven't followed it, they got him dead to rights on both of that, and also the obstruction charge. But the complication is the judge and the venue, because the judge has apparently scheduled a trial for Fort Pierce. I was speculating with David on the break that if I was the government, I would certainly consider having her have to have the trial in West Palm Beach. The court rules, frankly, require it. Judges are judges, and I'm sure she'd love to just be near her house and drive in every morning, but she shouldn't have been on the wheel for a West Palm Beach case if she didn't want to hold trials in West Palm. Oh,
yeah, that's a good point, too. Everyone remembers that the structure of this is that this is the federal district court in this area based in West Palm Beach. She essentially sits at a satellite courthouse in Fort Pierce, which is inconveniently located, to say the least, and has one tiny little courtroom. So, there's logistical problems with it. And everyone wondered at the beginning, well, how did it even get assigned to Cannon, who screwed this whole thing up earlier on? Why is the trial sitting with her? One, she was involved with the case, but also, as you said, the wheels. It
was a wheel thing, and the fact
that's how they assigned the cases.
Ruled out. Half the judges were ruled out for various reasons of schedule load and things like that. Mm-hmm. So it came down to really 4 judges. So it was a 25% chance.
Yeah, but
because she has included herself in the West Palm Beach wheel.
Yeah, that's one thing if you want to sit in Fort Pierce, and if people bring the case to you, like when they have the option of where to file, as they do in some of these other one-judge divisions, that's one thing. But yeah, she was saying any case that's filed in West Palm Beach, you can randomly assign to me too. And as you're pointing out, like if you're going to say, I'll take a case from West Palm Beach, it can't be the case. You say, oh, well, I asked for something from West Palm Beach, but everybody has to drive to Fort Pierce for me. You know, if you don't want to be on the wheel, don't be on the wheel. Fine.
Well, I think that, and I do, as I told you on the break, the court rule says that the trial shall be held where the crime is charged. The crime is charged in the West Palm Beach division. So
get a car.
The rule says, and you can only depart from that for justice reasons. Reasons of justice. There's no reason of justice to have it in Fort Pierce.
So there you go.
There's a reason of convenience for Judge
one person.
Hamilton.
Yeah,
and
nobody
obviously,
else.
Trump likes that it's in Fort Pierce because that's a much more favorable jury pool for him.
Yeah, he doesn't have to drive. He goes in a limo. He's living in West Palm, so fine. That's where the trial should be. But no, he's willing to take a helicopter or be driven in a limo.
For
justice.
He'll fight that tooth and nail, and rightly so. That's his chance of winning. I don't think even Cannon can beat the case for him, though she's tried. And not just in the special master thing. There's was a weird ruling that she got mad at Smith because he made reference to the D.C. grand jury.
Yes,
in a conflict. Petition for Waltinata's lawyer, a fellow named Stanley Woodward. Mm-hmm. Woodward represents a bunch of witnesses. And by the way, the lawyer for the De Oliveira defendant, who's one of the guys who worked at Mar-a-Lago as well, he also represented witnesses. You know, it's this whole Trump pays everybody's lawyers thing, right? And instead of getting individual lawyers for each person, these guys were taking multiple clients. Now that, I believe, is going to turn out to be a big mistake. I think Woodward is not going to be conflicted because Nauta will do whatever Trump tells him. But De Oliveira did something really weird, I thought. And I don't know if this is a directive from Trump or what, but his lawyer asked for a speedy trial. And says that by law, his trial has to start by October 9th. Now, it's funny. No one's actually paid attention to this in media or online or anybody. No one's said, hey, wait a second. This guy says my trial is going to happen October 9th. By contrast, when Ken Chesbrough did the same thing in Georgia and said his trial had to be by November 9th, and then Fani Willis said, fine, we'll have a trial October 23rd. Everybody, let's go. And Trump opposed that, and I think he has the right to, and say, I'm not going to be ready that date. I want Chesbrough severed from my case. Mm-hmm. But as of today, you know, the judge entered an order saying, okay, well, the Chesbrough trial will be October 23rd. Now,
if he asks and nobody objects, then sure.
No other defendant has asked for October 23rd, so I guess Chesbrough would go by himself, and the other 18 will go at some point. But then there's the whole issue in Georgia of what the federal officer removal statute that we talked about. And, of course, Mark Meadows has invoked that. Jeff Clark has invoked that. Eventually, one suspects that Trump will invoke that. Mm-hmm. I think it fails because nothing they were doing involved their federal duties. Whether Donald Trump gets his recount as a candidate, et cetera, is personal to Donald Trump. It's and I thought Fani Willis made a very effective point that what Mark Meadows was doing is saying he was involved in campaign activities, which is barred by the Hatch Act. Mm-hmm. So you can't argue that something that's unlawful is part of your duties.
Right. Well, you're not supposed to. He has argued that in the past with Jean Carroll, for instance. Disparaging her was a presidential thing.
Well, you know, that was interesting. That was actually closer, but not even that close either, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I thought Judge Kaplan, the trial judge, got it right. And eventually now, Garland withdrew his position on that after taking it up and down and taking it to the D.C. local court of appeals and everything else. And now, as you know, that immunity argument's out. He lost the first case, and then he's liable here in the second case. So he'll probably lose another $5 million. And, the funny thing is, he's got a $250 million fraud case in January, civil case.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what the case is about, but it's going to trial, so there must be something to it. Because in federal court, if you really don't have anything, particularly on fraud, there's a lot of summary judgments that are granted on there, much more so than in state courts. So, he's got all these cases. He's got the Jean Carroll case, but I don't know how long that's going to take. I mean, it's basically the same facts.
Yeah.
And there's already, a finding on it, and he's going to be collaterally estopped, meaning he can't argue that it's not defamatory. So it's weird. So, the May 20th case goes forward. It's not going to be televised, but it's a wild card. There's a New York case where he's actually going to get convicted, too. Everybody said, oh, this is Penny Ante. It may be Penny Ante, but he's going to be convicted. And, he'll take appeals and whatnot. And people may discount it politically as not as important. But, it's hard to imagine a presidential candidate who's been convicted of felonies in at least 2 and maybe 3 jurisdictions.
And arguing that, well, yeah, sure, I have a third conviction. But the third one isn't really as serious as the first 2, which is, of course, a way of saying, no, the first 2 are fairly serious. And that doesn't really, I don't know. Normally that doesn't help you. I'm convicted, but on a minor charge.
And I do think that happens. Well, he's indicted. Well, he's got all these arguments. Okay, well, now he's convicted. Mm-hmm. Oh, he still has the same old arguments? No, he doesn't. He's convicted. Oh, and he takes an appeal. Oh, he's going to lose his appeals because he has no basis for appeals. Mm-hmm. And then he's a convicted felon, both in federal and state. Now, what's the theory? Oh, well, he can win and then he'll pardon himself.
That's the only theory he's got, I guess.
So wait a second. So you're on the ballot and you say, and he's asked, "Are you going to pardon yourself?" You're damn right. I'm going to pardon myself.
Yeah, he'll be upfront about that.
And I just don't know. I mean, it'll say something about the country if he gets elected again. Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly.
Yeah, if it's real, sure.
It's one thing to say, "Oh, well, the Republican Party stinks, the Republican voters stink," but the majority of the country isn't Republicans. Shouldn't everybody else not vote for him?
That's the theory.
Avoid that.
Yeah, and I mean, it looks like overwhelmingly people will react that way, but I guess we have to have that contest, which is amazing.
I mean, the numbers are that most people are saying he should suspend his campaign.
Yes.
And if he's convicted, he should drop out, and they're not going to vote for him. So, I mean, if that's true, then it'll. But there's a lot to still wonder about. But I do still, for 7 years we've talked about that the media has failed in the Trump era like nothing in the history of our country. Nothing has been as bad a performance than the media's. Now, Republicans are horrible. But that's their voters, and they're politicians, and they do what politicians do. But what's the media? What is the New York Times, the worst example of it all, doing when they say, "Well, let's cover the horse race aspect of a convicted felon being president"?
It's so crazy, it just might work. Yeah,
I mean, you can't just be neutral about that.
I mean. Normally, no.
Can't Peter Baker this. I don't know what Peter Baker himself is going to do. That's the
big mystery. Okay, yeah. How do you if your inclination is to say that the neutral approach requires me to say, well, people might decide to vote. I can't tell you not to vote for him. I mean, that's traditionally actually
he doesn't need to tell anything. He just needs to tell us, this is insane and it's crazy. But maybe that's what the country wants. Fine. But at least frame it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a story going out, and I just saw this, that says Donald Trump sold Mar-a-Lago before arrest listing reveals. It's not
I have
true.
Heard. Okay. I've heard this story.
I think it's not true.
It just didn't happen, or it happened differently than they're saying, or what?
Look, Donald Trump, to take you back, on something. Remember when he wanted to move back into Mar-a-Lago, but when he formed the club,
Yeah.
he had a covenant with the town of Palm Beach that he would
Yes.
never live there for more than 2 weeks and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And
they
then he
got together
came
with the
up
GSA
with a
guys.
theory that well, the owner is this corporation and I'm just an employee.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's the trick they came up with.
Okay.
He's an employee. He's a manager of the club. That's it. That's his job.
Okay. That's a theory.
So, Zillow. Zillow has its things, and if you actually look at the Zillow listing, there's a lot of weird stuff in it about Jose Briano and somebody loved their house at 1100 Ocean Boulevard. So it's very weird.
Okay.
But Donald Trump didn't have Mar-a-Lago in his personal name. He created a Mar-a-Lago something or other.
Okay, sure.
And now they found that there was somebody seems to think there was a transfer of title to a different Mar-a-Lago entity. And they looked it up, and it says, this is what Newsweek, which, by the way, is terrible, so not to believe this. But it says, but a later report by the Express mentions that the former president might have not really, quote, sold, unquote, the property, but simply transferred its ownership to an organization owned by his son, Donald Trump Jr. Now, how would they know that?
I don't know.
You would. Because if this was a Florida entity, what Florida entities do, you don't list the shareholders. And in fact, in Florida, there's these real problem with Russian oligarchs who create these blind real estate trusts, and you don't know who the actual owner is.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
But there's a name that's attached to it, or an organization that's attached to it that's the face. So suppose there's some organization, I sold Mar-a-Lago Inc., and Trump named Jr. as the president.
Okay.
That doesn't make him the owner.
All right.
All right. And the reason why he wouldn't do it, as a fraudulent conveyance scheme, it's not going to work. It's not like, you didn't know I was the owner of this, did you? It's silly, number one.
Okay.
But number two, if he did sell it to him and they listed a price, or if he gifted it to him,
yeah,
that creates a tax event. They have to pay taxes.
True.
And at the listed price of $422 million,
yeah,
that's a capital gain of $400 million or something, because he paid like $22 million or something 30 years ago, and you still, even at 10% or 15%, that's a lot of money, and he's not doing that.
Right.
But what you can do on transfer in Florida, and I've actually done this for clients, is you have it in your name, you want to transfer it to something else, you've got to control it and own the thing, so it's treated as a non-taxable transfer event. So Trump would not have transferred to something that he's not the owner of. So this is a bad story. It's incorrect in my opinion.
All right, I know that did come up, and it seemed weird, and I guess it's the sort of thing that sounds a little truthy, given that he was just being booked, and sometimes you could imagine people transferring assets so that they aren't reachable if they're convicted, although it's not clear that would have made any difference at all in the fines that are in the offering for these things. Even he wouldn't. It's not like you would have sold Mar-a-Lago to do that, and of course he didn't sell it by giving it to Trump Jr., even if that's what happened. So, but okay. That unravels that.
If you look at the Zillow,
that might not be authoritative.
It's a weird thing where the owner, talks about loving his place, and his name is Briano. So it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, all right. Well, I guess that's a sort of thing like anybody. Who knows what? I don't know how Zillow works. I guess if you have an account and you claim to be the owner of this property, I don't know what you have to do to prove that you're the owner. And even then, if you're hacked, God only knows what. So it's the equivalent of saying, well, for 15 minutes, Wikipedia said Mar-a-Lago was owned by Hugo Chavez. Oh, okay.
I believe it's like that.
All right.
No one thinks enough about it to pay attention to it.
It was owned by Hugo Chavez.
As I said, it just doesn't make sense.
All right, fair enough. That's okay. How did we land on that? All right. Well, just a random note.
It just came up. I
Sure.
apologize for bringing it up. I was looking for something.
People want to know.
and don't take it to town is all I'm saying.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, if there's other stuff, let's see. We were talking about various aspects of the indictments. Why you prefer the Jack Smith narrative?
I think what funny thing is that I would mention to you here is yesterday there was a debate, right?
Yes, Wednesday actually. Yeah.
A whole 2 days ago. Did anybody?
Crickets. Right. No. All I've seen, the only reporting I've seen out of it is that Ramaswamy is a very smarmy jerk, and everyone should realize that he could be a crazy demagogue.
Could be. I mean, he is obviously,
Yeah.
but I still don't know what he's in it for. Just to become famous, because he's not going to.
Yeah, I don't know.
He's not going to be nominated.
All right.
I don't think once Trump's there. My theory is that he's not going to want a Ramaswamy. He's going to want somebody that seems normal. And I would have thought Tim Scott, but everybody thought he did terrible, and Haley did good. So maybe Haley's got the lead on that now. I honestly think he's going to say, "Look, I'm the Republican nominee now, and you got to treat me normally."
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. Well, I don't know what the upshot of this whole the debate is likely to be, but I mean, obviously, no one really discussing it other than by saying, one, Trump was absent, and two, Ramaswamy.
About it, and he had some audience, but I just the next day, he had those 800 cops in the New York, New Jersey area escorting him to Newark Airport, and I guess got the same treatment when he was in New York. By the way, is anyone going to ask who assigned all these cops to this thing?
Oh, to the debate?
No, to the
Trump. Oh, yeah. No, but everyone probably should. There's really no reason that they needed to do that. And
I mean, I've never seen that many people in a Trump motorcade anyway. I mean, it was like one of those police rallies for racist politicians.
I'm not certain why they thought they needed to do that. I mean, he obviously did it, I think, to show I'm still an important guy, et cetera, et cetera. But that's about it. The only reason I can think of. You know what? I've got a request here. Greg was asking if he might join in here. Maybe I can give Greg a call, and he can at least come in and I'm bringing him here to wish me a happy birthday. We'll see what happens with you. All right, let's see. I think I have to look him up and give him a call, because otherwise we have to create some kind of otherwise weird group thing here. But I'll ask you while I have you to myself here. Did you happen to see the? Here we go. We got to call him up. Did you happen to see the Michael Ludwig interview just from the other day about the 14th Amendment ideas?
Here we go.
And then we got a little echo here. I guess Greg is now on the line. Are you here, Greg?
I am.
Okay. Let's get to the business part of this. First of all, but let me ask Armando. I was just asking him about the Michael Ludwig interview that you mentioned yesterday. Did you happen to see that one, Armando?
I didn't see the interview, but I'm pretty familiar with the Section 14.3, the 14th Amendment, Section 3 stuff.
Yes.
That was kicked off in a big way by Will Baud and Michael Paulson, who, of course, are Federalist Society conservative professors, but of the more honest variety, clearly. And I tell you, the problem I have with the theory about it, but then they say, I guess I don't have a problem with the theory. I think it's not being conveyed properly.
Okay.
Is that, well, you as a Secretary of State of whatever, let's pick New Mexico, which already disqualified somebody. And they say Trump can't be on the ballot in New Mexico. He's not going to win New Mexico anyway, so it's not a big deal. But just to kick off the legal point. And then Trump says, you can't do that. That's wrong. And he goes to court and he says, that he asks for a declaration or a reversal of that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets litigated through the courts, and eventually someone says, well, it goes to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court of the United States says, what?
Yeah, we don't know yet.
But I mean, what are they going to say in terms of the law? They're going to say it's self-executing, or it's not self-executing. It requires the Congress to pass a different law.
Mm-hmm.
There's that case from Justice Chase when he said as a circuit judge, but it's not really that on point anyway. And Noah Feldman, of course, hangs his hat on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a complicated issue, and I appreciate that the academic exercise and all the hard work in that law review article, and obviously people feel that way about it. But I'm not 100% sure that of how you enforce it, and I'm not convinced that the arguments could prevail anyway. And I'm not
I don't know how you could
want to get into that political question anyway.
I don't know how you could be, and I imagine in the end, I mean, what it comes down to is they made this fantastic, in their view, fantastic argument. I think it's okay. And you'll present it to the Supreme Court and basically set it up as if the Supreme Court turns away from this, it would be outrageous. And then the Supreme Court turns away from it, and everybody says, this is, in fact, outrageous. Right. We're outraged.
Well, the funny thing is, if in my hypothetical, the New Mexico Secretary of State takes that position and the Supreme Court says, well, I can't get involved, well, then he's off the ballot in New Mexico.
And California, because Gavin Newsom specifically says he's looking into it. But the whole point is that the secretaries of state can do this, and it's not up to Congress.
Well, I think
that's the point they're trying to make.
Yeah, that it's, quote, self-executed. And I think it might be. And I think that practically speaking, it will be. But, they're not going to do it in Texas or Georgia, or I guess I could do it in Arizona. That would be the interesting one, right?
Yeah.
Because
the
we
places
have
where
Secretary of State there. In Michigan, you could do it. In Pennsylvania, you could do it. Those would be the tests, right?
Yeah, it's a swing state thing.
Those are the states that are going to decide the election. It's not going to be California or New Mexico or Florida or Texas or New York. I don't know.
If he were off the ballot in Florida or Texas, that would decide the election. If he were off the ballot,
I do think if I was the Secretary of State, I would wait for the conviction under 1512 that I've discussed before on the show. If Trump is convicted of obstructing an official proceeding for the vote count, I think you can talk about it as an insurrection. To overturn the government. And at that point, you have something to hang your hat on. And I think if you're going to do it, I'd wait for that conviction in the January 6th federal case.
Well, as far as I know, Ludig and the other academics haven't said that you have to do it now.
Well, I think they think that it can be done now.
Right. But if you wait until, like you said, then you even have a stronger case.
Well, I just think
it's just not ridiculous on the face of it.
No, it isn't. It says what it says. I mean, there's no basis for thinking that it's not self-executing. Even Turley doesn't argue about how you do it. He just says, well, you can't say that's insurrection. Insurrection doesn't mean that.
Right. We got one more minute on the show, so I'm going to interrupt you just so I could wish you a happy birthday. And I wanted to wish David a happy birthday. I'm glad you guys could get together and do this.
Yeah.
I want to throw one other thing in there. The thing about the Georgia case, you said it's complicated. It is. But the good thing about that? It indicts the entire Republican Party, and that's what's so good about it.
I honestly think the main case won't go before the election. I just think there's too much.
Sure, but we'll know a lot about it. For example, Sean Still, the guy you were talking about who's one of the fake electors, he's currently a state senator in Georgia, but at the time he was the finance chair of the Republican Party. You mentioned David Schaefer, who was the former chair of the Republican Party. You go down the list of people who were indicted, and except maybe for the Kanye West adjacent folks who were pressuring Shea Moss and Ruby Freeman, they're all Republicans. So that's what's going to come out of it. You don't have to wait for the trial and the sentencing to, and the results to know that it's an indictment of the Republican Party.
I mean, the thing about the Georgia case is that it's when it happens, and I just don't, everything will be on TV within the state court.
If it stays there, yeah.
Yeah, like interestingly, Monday there's going to be an evidentiary hearing in the Meadows case, which is going to bring out a lot of interesting things. But
right, and then September for the Jeffery Clark case.
Right, exactly, and that'll get some coverage, but you won't be able to see it. I mean, the TV aspect of this is really important in Georgia, and if they could somehow get it on before the election, even in the summer, that would be devastating for Trump, in my opinion, and for the Republican Party. But
like you said, most people don't want to vote for him anyway. Here's your excuse.
Well, I mean, I think if he's again, I hope and I think the January 6th case is going to go first. I don't know if it'll go in January. It might get pushed into March. But I think Chutkan is not going to buy the million-page argument, and I think she's going to put it on for March. And right. I think he's going to be convicted in that case of two counts of two of the counts of 1512. I don't know enough about the conspiracy to defraud stuff to really give you a good read on that, or the civil rights violations. But the 1512, as I described it, at least in my mind, to David, I think those are open and shut. The fake election occurred. He was behind it. It was intended to impede the vote count. Boom, done. Right.
And the non-lawyers out there who are voting, I mean, you mentioned that, upwards of 60% or more don't want to vote for him. A similar number thinks he's been criming, so this is just going to reinforce that.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Pictures, a picture tells a thousand words, and a conviction does too. And I do think that will be a turning point, I hope. And hopefully the media, particularly Peter Baker and the New York Times types, get it right. After that, at least that should get them there. I would hope so, anyway.
All right. Well, we do actually have to go at this point.
Yeah, but let's do this for another year.
Right.
See you next year, guys.
Okay. Well, very good. Thank you so much, Armando, for joining us for today, and happy birthday to you. Thanks, Greg, for chiming in at the end. And good dynamics of the show. As I was looking for a place to break in and say, Greg just wanted to drop by and say hi. Greg just dropped in and did it himself. So, excellent. Good dynamics there. Thanks again to everybody. We'll keep an eye on these things. It's exciting times. The picture tells 1,000 words. And today's picture of the day, of course, the mugshot. But, the real complexities come later on. But maybe you can join us again at some point in the near future, Armando. People have been asking for you. So it's a good time to break back in and make it a habit, if you don't mind. All right. Well, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Scott. Tomorrow is his birthday, and retroactive again to Darwin Darko, our friend on August 23rd. Time now, though, for us to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and for me to wish good day to the rest of our participants of the impromptu panel at the end. Stay tuned for his version of the roundup of news on the MAGA mugshot, plus, of course, actual important news from around the country and around the world coming up after this short message.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Okay, so what's he got on tap for you here? For instance, let's see. Actual SEALs, as it turns out, are not happy with DeSantis' claims of being a Navy SEAL. Did he claim to be a Navy SEAL? That awkward guy? I don't know. That seems pretty outrageous to me. I hadn't heard that one, but hey, anything could happen among today's Republican Party. Stay tuned to find out more.